Let's bring in Melinda Haring, who is a senior community engagement advisor at Razom for Ukraine and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thanks so much for joining us on the program, Melinda. It's great to have you. Tell us why, in your mind, do you think that Ukraine went after this top commander, and do you think that his killing will change anything on the ground?
It's great to be here. So this is not the first Russian general who's been killed over the last 3 years since the big war began in Ukraine. But this is the first general who's been killed in Russia, far from the front lines. Will it change anything? No, but it sends a message to Russians that the war is not as far as they may think, and that high-level Russian military officials cannot hide from the Ukrainian side.
And of course, Ukrainian agents have killed this top commander in the Russian capital on Russian soil. How much of an embarrassment is this for the Kremlin to have this security breach?
It's a big time embarrassment. It's shocking, actually. We've seen a series, though, it fits a pattern. We've seen a series in the last couple of weeks of other Russian military officials either being hit by cars or dying in circumstances that don't make sense. So I expect to see more of this behavior from the Ukrainian SBU.
And of course, General Kirillov was prominent not only in terms of military wise, he was also prominent in terms of Russia's propaganda over the war in Ukraine. And his death comes at a time when Russian morale is already very low. Tell us what impact it's going to have in terms of propaganda and morale among Russian public.
That's right. So this general was sort of notorious for going on Russian state TV and stirring the pot and propagating Russian lies. So it will definitely have an impact on that. But I have to say there's no shortage of Russian propagandists. But I think it's more significant that this was the man who was in charge of chemical weapons. And we've seen the Russian side use chemical weapons in at least 50,000 instances, according to the Ukrainians, along the front line on Ukrainian soldiers. So I think this is, it feels like sweet revenge on the Ukrainian side that they have hit a target who was attacking Ukrainian soldiers. And the kind of chemical weapons that they're using are horrific and obviously cause a lot of pain and difficulty with breathing. So I think that there was a lot of cheering in Kyiv when this news broke.
Let's talk about the wider context here, Melinda. Of course, Ukraine is now trying to ramp up its own arms production in Ukraine, and that's, of course, ahead of an incoming Trump presidency. Tell us how you see the future of US aid for Kyiv with Trump going to return to the White House in January.
So no one knows. And there's a couple of different scenarios. One scenario is that Donald Trump is highly skeptical of Ukraine aid. He thinks that Zelensky is the greatest showman he's ever seen, and he zeroes out assistance on January 20th. And the Ukrainians and the Europeans are stuck, and they have to figure out a way out. That's one option, and that's the most extreme option. I don't think that's the likely scenario. Donald Trump has a number of nominees, including Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who's the special envoy to Ukraine and Russia, who are quite tough on Russia. He's also nominated Mr. Waltz, who's a congressman, as his national security advisor, who's also he has a very internationalist view. So I don't expect Trump to zero out aid. Trump wants to bring peace to the war between Russia and Ukraine, and he says he's going to do it in 24 hours. But no one here in Washington believes him. We all think that's a campaign promise. The question, though, the big question, no one has an answer to this, is how do you compel, how do you get Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table? Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg has suggested that you tell Kyiv, you must come to the negotiating table or we will cut off arms. And then Moscow will come to the negotiating table in exchange for freezing that the Ukraine will either not join NATO or there will be a freezing of its NATO aspirations and some sanctions relief. Moscow already has said, drop dead, no thanks. So it's unclear how Putin is going to meet this campaign pledge.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. I want to talk about the fact that NATO's chief, Mark Rutte, just a few days ago spoke of the fact that NATO members need to change to a wartime mindset and warned that NATO members aren't doing enough to prepare for a possible scenario of entering war with Russia. Do you think that NATO members are taking that warning seriously enough?
So I think Europe is scared. They have been sitting on their hands for the last 3 years. Europe it relies on the United States to protect them with military power. And there is a scenario in which Trump says, "You're on your own, guys. We've been telling you you need to meet the NATO quota, and you're not doing it." So yes, I think Europe is scared, but they haven't put the production lines, the kind of defensive lines in place that they needed to do years ago. So they're quite nervous, and I think the NATO secretary's remarks are spot on.
Melinda, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. Melinda Haring there speaking from Washington. She's a senior community engagement advisor at Razom for Ukraine.